It was just after 1 o'clock in the morning when the sound of chaos shattered the silence of a Florida neighborhood. A 911 operator's headset filled with the trembling voice of a mother, panic-stricken, begging for help. Her son lay bleeding in his bedroom, his young life slipping away with each passing second. That house on Glasgow Drive in Loxahatchee would become the stage of one of the most heartbreaking and shocking cases Palm Beach County had ever witnessed. A brutal killing that would expose not only the violent rupture of a young relationship, but also the twisted depths of obsession, betrayal, and desperation. This is not just the story of James Berry, a 21-year-old full of promise whose life was violently stolen in the middle of the night. It is also the story of love turned toxic, of families torn apart, and of a courtroom battle where truth itself seemed slippery, contested, and reframed at every turn. To tell this story is to walk through a house of mirrors, where every reflection raises new questions. Was this a crime of passion? A calculated act of revenge? Or was someone else lurking in the shadows that night, pulling the strings and escaping justice? Imagine for a moment the quiet of that November night in 2016. A family asleep, the air still, then the eruption. Screams for help, doors flung open, a desperate mother finding her son lifeless in his room, and a bloodied knife abandoned on a kitchen counter. 3 people survived that night inside the house, but all of them agreed on one thing almost instantly. The killer was not among them. The killer was James Berry's teenage girlfriend, Melanie Em. But was it really that simple? From the first moments after James's death, suspicion swirled like a storm. Theories collided, lies and truths became nearly indistinguishable. And soon, this case would leave detectives, lawyers, and even jurors struggling to determine what really happened inside that house. What led a 19-year-old girl who once baked cookies for her boyfriend's family to stand accused of ending his life with a butcher's knife? What pushed her so far that heartbreak transformed into homicide? Tonight we unravel the brutal murder of James Berry, a case filled with twists, betrayals, and a verdict that still leaves questions lingering in the air. Stay with me, because this is a story you won't forget. At 12:57 a.m. on November 16, 2016, a call jolted the Palm Beach County Emergency Dispatch Center to life. On the line was a woman's voice, frantic and trembling, words tumbling over one another as she begged for someone to come quickly. Her son was bleeding. He wasn't breathing properly. She couldn't understand what had happened. That voice belonged to 56-year-old Nicola Berry. Only moments before, she had been asleep in her bedroom with her longtime partner, Guy Hand, when the chaos began. It was James's best friend, Jeff Jarspikowski, who first screamed for help from the other side of the house. He had woken to a sound no one should ever have to hear. His best friend crying out in terror, struggling for breath, warning him to run. Nicola rushed to James's room and was met with a scene of horror no parent should ever witness. Her son, James Berry, just 21 years old, was slumped in his bedroom, his body covered in blood. The young man who had been laughing and gaming only hours earlier now gasped for life. Guy dropped to the floor beside him, performing chest compressions as Nicola dialed 911, her hand shaking so violently she could barely keep the phone steady. Within minutes, deputies and paramedics converged on Glasgow Drive. Neighbors peeked through windows and gathered on front lawns, drawn by the flashing lights and the sound of sirens cutting through the quiet night. Inside the home, EMTs took over from Guy, moving James onto the floor, working feverishly to revive him. But the damage was too severe. Multiple stab wounds had torn through his chest, one piercing deep enough to end his young life. At 1:13 a.m., James Berry was pronounced dead. The survivors, Nicola, Guy, and Jeff, were ushered outside into the cool night air. They clung to one another, sobbing, shocked, unable to process the nightmare that had unfolded in a place that should have been safe. But almost as quickly as grief came, so too did suspicion. On a nearby patio table, officers spotted something curious: a pink cell phone case. Inside, a phone belonging to none other than Melanie Em, James's 19-year-old girlfriend. Next to it, droplets of blood. Inside, a white-handled carving knife rested on the kitchen counter, its 10-inch blade smeared with blood. Investigators would later learn that the knife hadn't come from outside. It belonged to Guy, a butcher by trade, who had used it just hours earlier to carve their dinner. Whoever attacked James had reached into the family's own kitchen drawers to select the murder weapon. The house itself was puzzling. There were no signs of forced entry. The front door was locked. The side door was locked. The only anomaly was the back door, wide open. How, investigators asked, Could someone have slipped into the house without alerting the family or setting off alarms? The answer from those inside came quickly. It must have been Melanie. Jeff told deputies that James had been texting with her earlier that night, trying to end things once and for all. She had even come by uninvited around 8:30 p.m., but James had asked her to leave. Now Jeff was convinced she had returned, furious, and somehow slipped inside. Guy chimed in too, saying he had locked the doors before bed, but maybe Melanie had stolen a key. Nicola was distraught, barely able to comprehend the words spilling out of her partner and James's best friend. But she nodded too. To them, there was no one else who could have done this. As officers tried to secure the scene, the accusations grew louder. "She's always been psycho," one voice muttered. "She killed him. It was almost too quick, the way the family pointed the finger," investigators would later note. But in the fog of grief and shock, their certainty seemed unshakable. James's girlfriend had murdered him. Still, questions lingered. How had she gotten inside? Why was her phone left outside near the back door? And if she had committed this crime of passion, why hadn't she been found nearby? By the time law enforcement began piecing the puzzle together, Melanie was already hundreds of miles away, on a desperate drive that would raise even more suspicion. To understand what happened that night in November, you have to step back in time. Because the murder of James Barry was not born in a single moment of rage, it was the tragic climax of a relationship that had been teetering on the edge for years. James Barry was a young man with a gentle soul. Friends and family described him as loyal, thoughtful, and full of quiet humor. He loved video games, animals, and the simple comfort of spending time with the people closest to him. After his parents' divorce, he lived with his mother Nicola, and later with her partner Guy, building a new sense of family within their home in Loxahatchee, Florida. It was in high school that James met Melanie Em. She was younger, shy, and soft-spoken, but she shared his interests. The two bonded over gaming, often spending late nights laughing in front of glowing screens, strategizing and competing together. What started as friendship blossomed into romance, and before long, the two were inseparable. Nicola at first welcomed Melanie into the family. She was polite. She helped in the kitchen. She even baked treats for the Barrys. Holidays came and went with Melanie at their dinner table, smiling shyly but clearly at home. For James's older sister, Alexandra, it seemed like her brother had found someone who cared deeply for him. But behind the smiles and shared moments, cracks had already begun to form. Their relationship became a cycle of intense highs and devastating lows. They broke up, got back together, broke up again, a roller coaster of emotion that neither seemed able to step off. James was growing older, stepping into college life at Palm Beach State, eager to focus on his studies and future. Melanie, younger, rushed to keep pace, leaving school to earn her GED so she could follow him into the same program. The closeness that once seemed sweet now began to feel suffocating. Melanie grew jealous, often irrationally so, particularly over one of James's ex-girlfriends. She monitored his interactions, questioned his loyalties, and demanded reassurances that he could no longer give. James, quiet by nature, found it easier to type his feelings than to speak them out loud, and so late-night text messages became the battlefield for their unraveling relationship. In the hours before his death, James was doing just that, trying to put into words what his heart already knew. "It might be better for us to split and just focus on ourselves," he typed to her through a gaming app. He admitted he wasn't happy anymore. He told her it was time to let go. Melanie refused to believe him. "I thought you were happy with me before the past few days," she wrote back, clinging to a version of their love that no longer existed. But James didn't soften this time. He was clear, firm, final. "I'm not happy at all anymore," he told her. Those words cut deeper than any knife. For Melanie, heartbreak turned quickly to desperation. In her mind, James wasn't just her boyfriend. He was her world, her anchor, her identity. Losing him wasn't an option. And if she couldn't convince him to stay, something darker seemed to awaken inside her. Later that night, she drove to his house. She wasn't invited. She wasn't welcome. Jeff, James's best friend, spotted her car in the driveway and saw her lingering outside. James told her to leave. He texted her, "Go away, or we're done. We're over." She drove off, or so it seemed. But 3 hours later, her car was spotted again outside the house. By then, James was gaming with Jeff inside, unaware that his girlfriend was about to shatter his world. By the time dawn broke, James Barry would be dead, and Melanie Em would be on the run. From the very first moments after James Berry's body was discovered, suspicion locked onto one name, Melanie Em. Her phone, left behind in its pink case outside the back door, was the first clue. Blood droplets were nearby, leading investigators to believe she had fled the house in a rush. Inside, the knife used to kill James was confirmed to be Guy Hand's carving knife, normally stored neatly in the second drawer of the kitchen. That knife had been used earlier that evening to carve a roast for dinner, but now its blade was bent, smeared with James's blood. Detectives asked themselves, how could Melanie have known where the knives were? The answer was simple. She had spent countless hours in that kitchen. She knew the drawers. She knew the family. This wasn't a stranger stumbling in. Whoever did this was comfortable enough inside the home to navigate it in the dark. There was another puzzle. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No tampered locks. Every door was shut, except the back door, which now sat wide open. Guy told police he locked the house every night without fail. So how did Melanie get in? Had she stolen a key? Had James let her in one final time, against his better judgment? Or had she slipped in when no one was looking? The mystery of the door would linger throughout the case, fueling endless speculation. But what wasn't speculation was this. Melanie was gone. When officers visited her parents' home, she wasn't there. Her parents were confused, frightened even, insisting they had no idea where she might be. That only deepened investigators' concerns. If she was innocent, why run? Traffic cameras and toll records gave them the answer. Melanie had driven through the night, her silver Toyota Corolla heading north out of Florida. By the time police pieced together her route, she was hundreds of miles away, pulling into the driveway of a relative's home in Maryland. In the early hours, Maryland officers arrived quietly to confirm the vehicle's presence. There it was, parked out front, its gear shift later found to carry traces of James's blood. Inside, Melanie stayed with family, but she wasn't exactly hiding. When officers finally approached, she didn't act surprised. She seemed almost resigned, as though she knew they would find her. At first, Maryland authorities were told to simply conduct a welfare check. They weren't homicide investigators, and they weren't there to make an arrest. Their job was to knock on the door, make sure Melanie was safe, and note her location. When she stepped outside to speak with them, she looked pale, nervous, but calm. "I'm just scared," she admitted softly. "Of what?" She didn't say. Soon after, Detective Oliver from Palm Beach County arrived in Maryland. He was determined to get her version of events. Sitting at her uncle's kitchen table, with family members nearby and even a dog whimpering in the background, he pressed record on his cell phone. He told her she wasn't under arrest. He told her she didn't need to be read her rights. This was just a conversation, he said. But as the minutes ticked by, his questions grew sharper, his words more direct. "Everything shows that you just drove over there with the intention of killing James," he told her. "But if it was passion, if it wasn't planned, this is your chance to explain." And Melanie spoke. In a halting, uncertain voice, she admitted she had gone to James's house that night. She wanted to talk to him. He was breaking up with her, and she didn't believe he meant it. She told the detective she went into the kitchen, pulled a knife from the drawer, and confronted James. But she insisted she hadn't meant to kill him. "I thought he'd be okay," she said quietly. "I didn't think it was that much." Her words were devastating. She described tossing the knife aside before running out of the house. She admitted she drove through the night, stopping only at a Walmart to buy a new cell phone, leaving her old one behind. She admitted she had no intention of going back. To detectives, this was a confession. To her defense team, later, it was something else entirely. The product of suggestion, of a detective steering a young girl toward an admission she didn't truly mean. But for now, it was enough. Melanie was extradited back to Florida, booked into jail, and held without bond. She faced charges of manslaughter and second-degree murder. The shy teenager, who once baked for the Berry family, now stood accused of killing their son in cold blood. As Nicola Berry wept for her child, Palm Beach County braced for a trial that would pit two starkly different versions of the truth against one another. One painted Melanie as a scorned lover who snapped, drove to her ex-boyfriend's house, and killed him in a jealous rage. The other painted her as a traumatized witness, a young woman caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, blamed for a crime she didn't commit. What happened next would shock everyone who followed the case. By the fall of 2018, 2 years after James Berry's murder, the case against Melanie Em went to trial. The courtroom in Palm Beach County filled with a heavy silence, the kind that weighs down on everyone inside. On one side sat James's grieving family, their lives forever broken. On the other, a 19-year-old defendant, her expression unreadable, accused of brutally stabbing the young man she once claimed to love. From the beginning, the prosecution painted a clear picture. This was a crime of passion. James had broken up with Melanie that night. Rejected, humiliated, and consumed by jealousy, she armed herself with a knife from the kitchen drawer and attacked him as he slept. Then she fled, leaving behind her phone, her blood-stained shirt, and her dying boyfriend. They had her confession. They had her car parked outside. To the state, it was an open and shut case. But the defense came out swinging. Led by attorney Bruce Lear, their strategy was to dismantle the narrative and redirect suspicion. From the moment paramedics entered the house, he argued, the investigation was flawed. Detectives zeroed in on Melanie too quickly, ignoring the fact that 3 adults were inside the house that night. James's mother Nicola, his best friend Jeff, and Nicola's boyfriend, Guy Hand. If the doors were locked before bed, how could Melanie have gotten inside without forcing entry? And why, Lear asked, did Guy act so strangely after the attack? The jury listened as Lear laid out a startling theory, that it was Guy Hand who killed James Barry, not Melanie. Guy, the butcher by trade, was no stranger to knives. It was his knife that had killed James. He admitted he had taken a Valium before bed that night. He admitted he woke to chaos, saw James collapsed, and rushed in to help. But there were details that didn't sit right. He admitted he picked up the bloody knife, the murder weapon, and moved it from James's bedroom to the kitchen counter. He admitted he washed one of his hands with water before police photographed him. And when he performed CPR, he chose to lift James onto a soft bed rather than keeping him flat on the floor, a basic mistake for someone who claimed to have CPR training more than a dozen times. Why, the defense pressed, would an innocent man behave this way? Why move evidence? Why wash his hands? Why take control of the narrative almost instantly, pointing the finger at Melanie before police even had a chance to investigate? The prosecution countered. Guy acted in shock. He wasn't thinking like a suspect. He was thinking like a panicked stepfather trying desperately to help. The reason he picked up the knife, he testified, was to keep anyone from stepping on it in the chaos. The reason he washed his hand was because he'd been handed a glass of water and instinctively rinsed his palm. To the state, his actions were clumsy, not sinister. Still, the defense hammered the inconsistencies. They argued that Melanie wasn't a killer, but a frightened witness. Yes, her shirt had James's blood on it, because she was there. Yes, her car had blood on the gear shift, because she fled after seeing Guy stab James. She drove to Maryland not because she was guilty, they claimed, but because she was terrified. The tension in the courtroom was electric, as witness after witness took the stand. Jeff, James's best friend, testified that he never saw Melanie stab James. He only heard James calling out, warning him to run. He said Guy rushed in from another bedroom moments later, looking like he had just woken up. Nicola, James's mother, confirmed Guy had been in bed with her until the screams jolted them awake. Both swore they believed Melanie was the killer. Then came the confession, played for the jury. In her own words, Melanie admitted she stabbed James. "I didn't mean to," she said. "I thought he'd be okay." It was damning, but the defense argued she had been manipulated, pressured by Detective Oliver's leading questions, that she repeated back the theory he fed her because she was scared, naive, and overwhelmed. The trial stretched on, emotions running high. James's family clutched tissues, fighting back tears as his final moments were recounted in excruciating detail. Melanie sat still, often staring down at her hands, showing little reaction even as the most incriminating evidence was laid bare. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, they wrestled for 10 hours. But when they returned, they weren't united. 4 jurors voted for second-degree murder. 2 voted for manslaughter. Deadlocked. The judge declared a mistrial. It was a stunning turn. For James's family, it felt like agony. Justice delayed. For Melanie's defense, it was a sliver of hope. A new jury would have to decide. In January 2019, the retrial began. The arguments remained the same, but the pressure was greater. The state leaned heavily on the confession, pointing out that if Melanie had truly only witnessed the crime, why didn't she say so? Why didn't she accuse Guy in her statement? Why did she describe, in detail, how she took the knife from the drawer and used it against James? The defense stuck to their guns, raising doubts about Guy's actions and hammering home the image of Melanie as a frightened, broken teenager, too intimidated to resist a detective's narrative. They even questioned the physical strength needed to bend the knife blade during the attack. Wasn't it more likely, they asked, that a grown man, not a 90-pound girl, drove that knife with such force? But the second jury wasn't swayed. This time, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of second-degree murder. As the words were read aloud, Melanie stood still, her face blank, while sobs broke out in the gallery. James's family embraced one another, relief and grief tangled into one. After years of questions, they finally had an answer. Or so it seemed. On January 11, 2019, the second jury filed into the Palm Beach County courtroom, their expressions heavy, their eyes avoiding the defendant's table. The air was still, as though the room itself was holding its breath. Then, the foreperson stood and spoke the words that everyone had been waiting for. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Melanie Em, guilty of second-degree murder." The words seemed to echo against the walls. James's family clutched each other, sobs breaking through the silence. For them, it was a moment of bittersweet relief. Justice for James, finally. But no verdict, no sentence, could bring him back. Melanie, standing motionless, betrayed no reaction. Her face was blank, unreadable. At just 19 years old, she had gone from high school sweetheart to convicted murderer. But the trial wasn't over. Next came the sentencing. And here, the defense fought desperately to save her from the harshest possible punishment. A clinical and forensic psychologist took the stand, telling the court that Melanie had been a victim of long-term abuse at the hands of her mother. Physical, sexual, traumatic. For years, the psychologist claimed, Melanie had endured horrors behind closed doors, scars that shaped her mind, her decisions, her very sense of self. It was a bombshell. For the first time, Melanie's childhood trauma was being laid bare in court. The defense argued that this abuse explained her fragility, her desperation, her unhealthy dependence on James. That she wasn't a cold-blooded killer, but a broken girl lashing out in the chaos of rejection. The prosecution wasn't moved. They pointed out that the claims were unverified. No police reports, no social services records, nothing but Melanie's word and a cousin's. They reminded the court that James Berry was the victim here, not Melanie. That his life, his future, his dreams had been cut short by her actions. Judge Glenn Kelly listened carefully. He considered the psychologist's testimony, Melanie's young age, and her lack of criminal history. He weighed them against the brutality of the crime, the multiple stab wounds, the confession, the flight across state lines. When he finally spoke, his tone was somber. "This was a tragic case," he said, looking toward James's family. "A young man's life ended far too soon. A mother lost her son. A family lost a brother. And another young life, the defendant's, is forever altered." He paused, then delivered the sentence: 50 years in prison. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Melanie would spend the majority of her life behind bars, not eligible for release until she was over 70 years old. For Nicola Berry, the sentence brought some measure of peace. Standing before reporters, tears streaming down her face, she spoke about her son. "He was a good soul," she said. "He didn't have a mean bone in his body. He loved life. He loved his family. He loved his friends. He loved animals. He was just perfect. A perfect son." James's sister echoed her mother's grief. "There's not a second that goes by that we don't think about him," she said. "His future, what he could have had, gone. Just gone." Outside the courthouse, the prosecution called the sentence just. "She gets to think about what she did every single day," one prosecutor said firmly. "Every single day she wakes up behind those walls, she remembers James Berry." But for others, the case still left lingering doubts. Did the jury get it right? Was Melanie truly the one who wielded the knife that night? Or had the defense raised valid questions about Guy Hand's strange actions? Questions that would never truly be answered. In the end, the official record was clear. The jury had spoken. Melanie Em, once the quiet girlfriend who baked in the Berry family's kitchen, would spend 50 years in prison for murdering James Berry. And yet, as the courtroom emptied and the lights dimmed, the story didn't feel finished. It felt like a wound, deep, raw, and aching, one that would never fully heal for the Berry family. Because in cases like these, there is no true closure. There is only survival. The story of James Berry's murder is one of those cases that lingers long after the verdict is read. It's a story of love turned toxic, of heartbreak that spiraled into violence, and of a family forever shattered by loss. James was just 21 years old, a young man with dreams, with potential, with a life still waiting to be lived. Instead, his future was stolen in a single night, and those who loved him are left with memories and an ache that will never fade. For Melanie Em, the girl who once sat at the Berry family's dinner table, life now stretches out in the shadow of prison walls. 50 years, a sentence that will consume her youth, her adulthood, and most of her future. Whether you believe she was a cold-blooded killer or a broken young woman caught in tragedy, the truth remains. James Berry is gone, and nothing will bring him back. This case forces us to ask difficult questions. How does young love twist into obsession? How do words typed in frustration, "I'm not happy anymore," ignite such destruction? And how do families move forward when the person they embraced as one of their own becomes the person responsible for their deepest pain? For Nicola Berry, the answers will never be enough. She lost her son, her light, her joy. For Alexandra, she lost her brother, and the future moments they should have shared. For Jeff, the best friend who heard James's final cries, there will always be the memory of that night, seared into his mind. True crime stories often end with a verdict, but justice is never as clean as a courtroom decision. It is messy, imperfect, and sometimes it leaves shadows behind. And in the quiet moments, when the headlines fade, the Berry family continues to live with the weight of absence. That was the brutal murder of James Berry, a story of love, betrayal, and irreversible loss. If you found this case as haunting and important as I did, don't forget to support this channel. Hit that like button to help share James's story, subscribe for more true crime documentaries, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Most of all, share this case with someone you know, because behind every headline, there's a real person whose story deserves to be remembered. This is Unsolved True Crime, and thank you for spending time with us tonight. Until next time, stay safe, take care of one another, and never forget James Berry.